Ladies and gentlemen, we are back, reunited, and it feels so good. Welcome back to the Rational Standard. I am your host for today. Sorry if you missed me last week. I had a much needed break, but still got some work done, although mainly worked on my tan, which unfortunately in South Africa, in a country where your complexion matters quite a bit, working on your tan can be quite important. But yes, feels good to be back. Glad to be talking to everyone today. I will unfortunately have to duck out a little bit sooner today as I have an important engagement at around 20 to 1. But luckily, we do have a very strong team today. As soon as everyone actually ends up arriving, you'll get that. Then you'll find out who the team's going to be. But as you can see, we've got Martin van Staden as always, and joining us from Cape Town, it's Joe Emilio. Thanks so much,
Hello.
Joe.
Sorry, I'm 2 minutes late. Sorry, I know how
No
punctual you
worries.
guys are.
I see Zach also fallen off for some reason, but I'm sure he'll be rejoining us in a moment.
Oh, I thought we were
Yes.
switching. Okay, sorry.
Oh, you thought you were taking his place. You thought we were replacing him. Yeah, Zake's just sent me a picture of a tiki torch. I'm not sure what that's all about. Okay. Everyone, today we're going to be talking about our government and the courts, actually. A little bit of a unique topic for us today. And it's sort of always a topic, particularly in the public policy space, where people are sort of always asking this question: is it really worthwhile approaching the courts? Have the courts been captured as well? Are they just as ideological as the rest of the government? I think you can make arguments to both sides, but I mean, what we're going to be looking at today in particular is that of late, at least, government hasn't had a very good record in the court. Earlier this month, we had a decision coming through regarding the VAT increase that evidently nobody wanted, but it still goes down as a loss for the government in that case, seeing as there was a decision that said they're not allowed to do the VAT increase. And just this week, we had and there we are joined by Mr. Mthembu. Welcome back, Mr. Mthembu.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Yeah. So, Zakes, it's a loss on the budget for the government. They've also had a loss this week on NHI. Now, I think there's a little bit more nuance on the NHI loss. It's mainly focused on actually the reasons why the president decided to sign the bill. And I think that's primarily based on the fact that there was quite a bit of prima facie evidence that there's obviously a lot of unconstitutionality. And at some point, the president does actually have to say that we do at least feign listening to the people who we are ostensibly supposed to represent. But on those big losses, we've also got a lot of court cases coming up. It's you've got employment equity. Just about everybody's lining up to litigate against that. You've got Zakhele, you've got the DA, you've got NIASA, Solidarity. Everybody attempting to either attack the Act itself, the Employment Equity Act, or then specifically the regulations proposed by the minister. And that's, of course, what everybody's referring to as the race quota sector codes, which is weird because there was a point at which I thought we're not allowed to call them quotas, but now I guess we are. And then finally, of course, we've always got the specter of EWC hanging over us, and everybody and their mother trying to litigate against that as well. So against that backdrop, and Zakes, let's last in, first out. Let's get your opinion on. I mean, pick up whichever one you want. They're piling up losses in the court, and we've got a lot of litigation on the way. What do you make of it? What do you make of the government's never really been good at litigating, but is it? Are we seeing some positive signs in general regarding the feasibility of court action as a means to stop bad policy?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, right? It is clearly evident. It has always been evident. This is something that I have when I talk to people from other African countries, right, especially at Africa Liberty Forum, I'm like, we are quite fortunate in South Africa to have a judiciary that is right, a judiciary that is willing to rule against the executive, and an executive that, after said rulings against it, is willing to more or less fall in line, even if the way they fall in line may be, in a not so forthright and honest way, but they do try and fall in line. They don't outrightly just reject court orders. So it's a good thing that we have. I think we should definitely keep that in mind generally, and this is why I see people who be like, allow our processes to take place, and trust in them, because I think over the past 2 decades the ANC has shown itself to be horrible, but not horrible so much so that they would disregard court orders. So there's that. Even the most heinous of ANC politicians, or any politician in South Africa, really seems to respect the courts for more or less. But the most interesting one to me, really, for I think in general our jurisprudence, I want to see what this will yield, would be the NHI judgment that the BHF got out of the I think the Gauteng High Court. It was, man, it is interesting, right? Because I think it's one of the first of its kind whereby the executive has been required, specifically the president has been required, to give reasons. I know in like administrative law, of course, it is a requirement that every administrative action is supposed to be justified by reasons, if you so wish. But in this instance, I guess this would be an administrative law case, but I don't think I've like seen a court order the state to be like, give us your reasons for why you passed a particular judgment, because stemming from those reasons, a whole lot of litigation can come out of that. Then you can start arguing for rationality and things like that. But then within the administrative legal fraternity, before you get into like the viability of it all, without when you touch other constitutional rights. So I think the NHI judgment, to me, it was something that firstly I was not following very well until I saw the judgment being reported on in the news. So when I saw it, I was pleasantly surprised. Like, man, this is good. To me, NHI is like one of the biggest threats. We have so many threats from these socialists, but like NHI is really up there, because it is all encompassing. And as I will keep on repeating myself, if we had COVID when we had NHI, we would have been we would have been in a lot of trouble, right? So I don't want the NHI, and I think that that was a generally good judgment. I haven't gotten around to reading it. I've just seen reports about it, and I think I read a summary of the judgment. I can't remember. It must have been on Deribas or somewhere. But I am excited by that one. I want to do read it, and the vet one, of course, is amazing. And then the upcoming one would be the Employment Equity one. I'm sorry, I'm talking a whole lot, but the Employment Equity Act one was also interesting to me, right? Because it will touch on, like, I want to see the.
Oh, goodness. I think we just lost Zakes. Well, that's what you get for when someone asked you to choose, you decided you choose all of them. So, Martin, why don't you pick it up from there? Because I agree with Zakes. The NHI decision was actually quite interesting in that it was a kind of unique court decision. It was a case where, in the past, I don't think it was exactly clear that that the president, when exercising his authority to assent to legislation, that he actually has to also furnish reasons. But I think in this case, there was just so much evidence. There were so many people that were, just launching all of these various reasons for why it's unconstitutional that I think the courts just couldn't ignore that. But beyond the NHI, beyond the budget, I think we have we are seeing some hopeful matters, but unfortunately, most of these things are still quite procedural. It's still mainly on it's still mainly focused on, did you tick all the right boxes in the right format, and not necessarily on the substantive matters. And I do know that the Board of Healthcare Funders, the BHF, they sort of being explicit about it, that this is clearly clearly the first step in a long line of litigation. And that's actually a point that Zakes also made there when he was still with us, was that this sort of it sets the table for further litigation, but still very meaningful win in that case. So what do you make of it? What's which one of these, either the cases that have come up or those that are upcoming, which one are you do you think is most significant, or would you like to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, just as a general point, I think I would recommend watching the interview that Piet Leroux, or no, I think this was Russell Lamberti, did with Professor Kwes Malan recently on Zakhele's YouTube channel. Highly recommended. And there, the professor goes into the kind of the distinction between, let's say, ideological cases and non-ideological cases. I think what we've seen up to now, most of these judgments, VAT, NHI, so let's take those two. Those have been non-ideological, the winning cases. So there was other cases that were lost, but these two winning cases were non-ideological. And what Professor Malan then says is you can expect to win non-ideological cases when you go to the court and say, listen, there is a procedural irregularity, where there is an error of process here, then you can expect to win. But when you go to the court on a matter of substance that strikes at the heart of the state's chosen transformationist ideology, then you should prepare yourself to lose. And that's where potentially the employment equity case might be lost. I know on EWC, there's going to be, at least from the Free Market Foundation side, there's going to be arguments of substance, which I think the chances of them convincing certain parts of our judiciary are relatively low for these reasons, because the judicial elite is part of the political elite, and this is not an abnormal thing. I think this is relatively regular. What Zake said earlier is important to note, and that is that while our judicial elite, so Zake said that relative to kind of Africa, and I agree with this completely, our courts are very independent, very courageous, one can say. Our judges do feel the freedom to be able to stand up to the executive, but they still form a part of that political elite. Whereas in other African states, they are actually subservient. They're not part of the kind of they're not colleagues of the rest of the elite. They are the lapdogs that need to do as they're told, or they will go to prison. So that's an extremely important distinction. But nonetheless, the judiciary still forms part of our political elite, and that means you shouldn't expect judgments that destroy the foundations of whatever you're taking on. So that's, in that sense, it's kind of a long process. On the NHI judgment, I feel I'm conflicted. I love the outcome as a practical measure. Throwing sand into the gears of bad policy, I think, is a good thing. As far as its jurisprudential kind of validity, I wonder. I think that it's relatively set in stone that the president has a prerogative, a constitutionally entrenched and I think quite clearly stated prerogative to if he thinks, or if they think, the president thinks that the legislation is unconstitutional, he can refer that back to the National Assembly. To me, the Constitution is clear that it's in his mind. If it is in his mind unconstitutional, then it must go. So for the court now to say that, well, he must give reasons, I think is maybe stretching the what that constitutional provision is saying a little bit too far, at least on that basis. I think if the court said this was an obviously irrational exercise of power, given the preponderance of, let's say, evidence that there is in fact a constitutional issue of this legislation, you should have in fact come to a given conclusion. But the court doesn't go that far, because the court would see that as overstepping its bounds. Whereas that is, I would imagine that would be a far more sensible judgment to say that in fact, on substance, the NHI is on its face, prima facie, an unconstitutional piece of legislation. This was pointed out to you, Mr. President, and you ignored this. And I would say in that context, it would make sense for the court to say, hey, actually tell us what happened here. Clearly there's something irrational happening here. But the court didn't go that far. The court said, yeah, give reasons. There was commentary, and maybe it seems like you ignored it. So there's always a balancing act that I think the judiciary is going to engage in. And Professor Malan also goes into this. He says the courts, we as litigants should not put the courts in a position where they are going to undermine their own authority. So if we ask a judge to say, oh, this whole thing is just invalid and you have to kind of upend the whole apple cart, the judge, who is a human being, is going to think, wow, I might be unemploying myself here very quickly and maybe leading to what FDR in the US wanted to do, pack the court with kind of ideological comrades. So judges are going to be hesitant to do that. They would want to have a more conservative approach to their judgment. So yeah, it's always a balancing act. You're not going to get everything you want. And yeah, I do feel a little bit conflicted about the jurisprudence, but I'm very happy about the outcome, obviously.
Yeah, actually, and Joe, I'll get to you now. I actually think that one of the reasons why you did get that judgment in the NHI case is because basically the argument that the government were making was undermining the authority of the courts. They were basically saying that no, you have absolutely no authority. You're not allowed to speak on or to judge regarding these matters. And I think that was actually the main error on the government part, was to basically hook their case on that angle, that the president can do as he pleases in this context, and the courts aren't allowed to say anything about it. So I think that was actually a strategic error on their part. But Joe, I see you've already got your hand up. Yeah, I see there are some people in the comments also saying that sometimes the litigation focuses only on technicalities, doesn't really take on the law itself. I think that's maybe something we could delve into as well, whether or not that's desirable from a litigation perspective. But Joe, what's your general take, or what are you absolutely keen on saying in this regard?
Thanks, Morné. So actually, Dorian put out a comment earlier saying, what are our thoughts on the Gator deployments? Because it's also another recent court ruling, and I think it goes in line with what Martin was saying, like exactly in line with what Martin was saying. A real-time example of that, which is when you question, and by the way, I saw the same podcast. I did watch it. It's brilliant and very revealing. But again, a real live example of when you question the courts ideologically, you're probably not going to get the outcome you wanted. Like the courts literally. So first, the ruling on the cater deployment thing was, the DA wanted to rule cater deployment unconstitutional. The one court said, nope, it's not unconstitutional. So the DA wanted to appeal that, and the appeal was dismissed quite recently, I think in the past week or so. And now the DA is trying to go to, I think, the Constitutional Court, Supreme Court, can't remember now, to obviously see if they'll take it. But again, to Martin's point and to Zakhele's point, the moment you start questioning ideological backbone of an institution or an organization, a political party that is in power, you're not going to win, because most of the time the courts actually are leaning towards the same ideology as the ANC. Not all judges, but most of them, especially when you start going higher up, and that's what, of course, Malan was talking about. Because remember, judges are also appointed by politicians sometimes, and Julius Malema's on the board of I don't know what, so he's also appointing judges. So yeah, I think to say that our judicial system is completely independent and all that stuff, maybe to a certain degree. But obviously, like on a lower level, maybe, when it comes to like, oh, I'm taking Martin to court because he defamed me, or oh, I'm going I'm taking this person to court because he owes me money. Like, yeah, that's pretty much straight. That's not an ideological question. That's like, okay, you broke the law, here you go, this is your sentence. Whereas when it comes to ideological things like kill the Boer or cater deployment and all that stuff that really defines the ANC, the court's going to have a hard time to say, well, you might be right, guys, but we want to keep our jobs. So sorry. Yeah.
As a cater, speaking as a cater, I don't think cater deployment is I don't see anything wrong with it.
Exactly. So that's on that topic. In terms of the NHI ruling, that's what we're talking about mainly. I'm keen to see what Cyril's reasoning was, because I bet you there was no reasoning. He just got the piece of paper and was like, okay. The reasoning was votes, which it completely backfired. If there's any reasoning, it was like, oh, we're going to try and get our voter base back, and it completely backfired. So because I think correct me if I'm wrong, he signed it just before the elections, right? Yeah. Yep. So in my opinion, he was trying to get voters, and I think that completely backfired, as we saw with the results of the election. And now, I don't know, man, maybe everybody was right when they said this isn't going to come to fruition. There was a lot of analysts who said that they're going to be in courts for years. It's never going to be implemented. And I think maybe this is the beginning of the dismantling of the NHI, because, even though like the courts might have an ideological leaning, and some might agree with NHI, you still can't ignore the facts, the hard facts that the country can't afford it. That is a very good example of that. Like, people couldn't afford to pay another 0.5 or 1% in 2 years. The country just can't. The economy isn't there. So if we can't raise VAT, we definitely can't do NHI. We can't do the universal basic income stupid grant that they want to do. Like, I don't understand what is so hard for people to understand. I don't want to swear. We're broke, guys. We're broke. The country is broke. We have no money, nothing. Okay. Yeah. There's nothing, nada, finished. I don't know how people don't understand this. That's why the government wants to try and squeeze the taxpayer base out of to fund all this stuff. And I mean, yeah, I honestly, I think on my last point, if any of this stuff, whether it was VAT, NHI, anything that is going to increase the pressure on the tax voter base, I think we're going to see mass protesting and riots, because the moment people can't buy bread, we're in a very, very delicate situation.
Yeah, especially when it's quite clear that you're not getting anything for that tax money. I think that's sort of the main issue here, is that, first of all, we don't have the funds, the economy can't withstand it. And secondly, we know that even if it could, we wouldn't get the services. I think that, I think you might be able to persuade more people if anybody thought you'd actually do a good job of it. But absolutely nobody believes that. And I think that's actually why there's a far broader opposition to a lot of these things than there may traditionally have been. But yeah, Joe, I agree with you completely. That's at some point reality also gets a vote. I mean, you can dream up all these nice dreams, but reality is going to come back to bite you at some point. But I'd like to just delve into that the one point that Joe made about saying that the courts are independent to some extent, or I'd say to a relatively large extent. But I mean, obviously they are. Basically, they do owe their positions to the politicians, and it's sort of a weird thing. Martin and I spoke about this privately earlier this week. Just the fact that you don't have that same almost culture in South Africa that you have in the US, for example, where I mean, it's trite. It's commonplace for whenever a judgment is delivered against the administration, to cite who appointed the particular judge. So, Trump appointed judge finds against Trump, or Obama appointed judge finds against Trump, or Biden appointed judge, or so forth. But nobody seems to ever go ANC appointed judge, or oh, look, the Kill the Boer judgment was delivered. Did you know that on that bench, Julius Malema was involved with the appointment of, 90% of the judges or something like that. I just think it's at least an interesting point to to discuss in these contexts, because not necessarily because you want to decrease the amount of trust in the court system, but because you want to at least increase a little bit of pressure on judges so that they feel they at least have an obligation not only to, as they would say themselves, not only to be independent, but to seem independent, to be seen to be independent. And I think Martin, seeing as it's a discussion that we had earlier this week, maybe you can kick that off, and Zakes, if you have anything to add to that, then feel free.
Yeah. So it's like I said earlier. I think it's normal. The pure fact that the judges form part of the political elite. I mean, you can't have it any other way. You're not going to rise up to become an advocate with decades of experience, or a law professor with decades of experience who has the political know-how to navigate the JSC process and then the parliamentary and then the presidential process. You're not going to be able to pull that off unless you form part of the political elite. And the political elite obviously includes opposition politicians as well. It's not just the ANC, but it is at least within a milieu where the ANC forms the core. Having governed for so long, it has defined what it is to be part of the political elite in this country. And our system of appointment is, again, I think it's bad. I think it's a bad system, but it's not terribly abnormal for the legislature to play such a big role in choosing who is going to be judges, and of course the president to have the prerogative ultimately to appoint members of all our courts, all of our superior courts at the very least. I think the Minister of Justice appoints magistrates. So it's normal, but it is something, and I like this point, Morné. I think this is something that our press obviously needs to get a lot more comfortable with, and something our civil society needs to get a lot more comfortable with, is to treat the courts as what they are. They are ultimately political institutions. That doesn't mean you ignore the courts. Of course not. You shouldn't ignore the courts. It doesn't mean you badmouth the courts. It doesn't mean you go after judges and so on. It just means that you understand the reality that you live in. And that does mean, yes, ANC appointed judges, even if you want Ramaphosa appointed judges, Zuma appointed judges, whatever. But this thing in South Africa where we treat the courts as somehow aloof from the political dispensation, and this is something the media has been ingenious in at inculcating amongst the population. And this is not a new thing. This goes back, 100 years in South Africa, where there is this sense that our judges, they're not part of the apartheid elite. This was a very common thing. Even liberal progressives who criticized the apartheid system, even though when the judges were making brazenly pro-executive decisions, they still said no. But of course, these judges are independent and they just kind of erred. No, it's not the case. The reality is, yeah,
it's once you put those robes on, you cease to be human. You're above. You don't have all the same incentives or anything that normal human beings have. You're sort of on a different level.
And I think that there is a value in that. There is a value in establishing a mythology and a kind of symbolic aura around the courts. Humanity has always found immense value in ceremony. Ceremony isn't just ceremonial, as people often say. It doesn't mean it's irrelevant. Ceremony is important. Donning the wig in many countries, saying "my lord" to the judge in many in South Africa and in many countries. These things hold value because they contribute to the credibility and the respect the courts obviously ultimately have. But the thing is, the United States has this. It has all of this, and it has that level of maturity. And there's many aspects of U.S. court politics that I think is very immature, very immature. Like electing judges to me is, I let's not get into that. That's ridiculous. But at least they have the maturity to speak of their courts as what they are, which is part of the ultimate policy and politics making, lawmaking apparatus of their society. It's a very legal realist approach that I think that didn't used to be that way in the US, but from the previous century, the beginning of the previous century onwards, after Oliver Wendell Holmes became a kind of a prominent legal realist in the superior courts of the US, the Americans have accepted this. It is that the court does play a role in sometimes solidifying the elite consensus and oftentimes pressing back against it, but still from within that political elite. And I think we miss something in South Africa by not seeing our courts for being that, because it is that. It's not like there's a difference. It is, the courts here are exactly what the courts are in the US, but we don't talk about it in that sense, and we are missing something. And that means, I think, to some degree, our policy discourse is in fact missing a very healthy dimension.
Yeah. Yeah, Zex, I actually want to link this up to something you said earlier, and I agree with Martin. Is you do want a certain level of sort of almost reverence for, the institution, and part of that is also because you feel that if you really revere the institution and you revere that its role in society, then hopefully it will also shape the people within it. So that's part of the reason why you also should have a high degree of appreciation for its importance in society. But I suppose the question is whether or not they actually deserve that degree of reverence, whether they're living up to it. And I think you actually made a point earlier that we don't always have things in the correct perspective. If we're really talking about should we appreciate our courts to the degree that we do, I mean, the classic question is compared to what? And I think that you alluded to it in your first statement, just the fact that actually on the whole our courts function quite well. They don't, from a global perspective, I mean, it can get a lot worse than it is currently, and it's not necessarily the case that we're in a constant decline. And it's a weird thing where, from the media's perspective, we have seen them turn against judges, mainly against chief justices when they have opinions regarding vaccines. But still, then you can see that veil drop quite quickly. Or I think actually on Israel as well.
On Israel,
yeah, as well. But yeah, so I mean, we do sort of have. Is it an issue mainly within the court system? Is it an issue of our perspective of the court system? Is it something that where's the actual, what's the lever you want to pull here in order to improve things, and how bad are things actually? Just because I think that people tend to think that South Africa has the worst governance structures in the world, and we're likely not. We're likely just amongst the worst, not really the very
not
worst.
really the worst. I think that is true. Amongst the worst, but not really the worst of the bunch. But I think the comparison to me, right? Particularly knowing a lot of people from other African states, West Africa, East Africa, man, like we should always be appreciative. I know it is horrible, as I said, we are among the worst, right? But I think that we should always keep that in mind. Like right now in Zimbabwe, right? Like judges, the idea of a judiciary is non-existent. It does not exist. Judges cannot rule against Mnangagwa under any circumstance. If they do, that's it for them. Like you. So that we aren't there yet. I don't think we can get there. But also there's like, I appreciate Martin's point that our media, right, doesn't have that appreciation of the political nature of the state, right? Like I always say that people talk about the three arms of the state as an anarchist. I always keep this in mind because it's like, it's still the state. The judiciary is still the state. It is just a different arm of the state, of course. And since I have the bias, I do fall into it too, right? I was trained legally, so I always tend to look at courts as like, out of all the arms, it is the best one because I understand it the most. But really, it is still the state, and I think having an appreciation of that will help us a lot. And Morné, as you said, that like it is sort of a willful veneration to the point of objectivity, and this harms us too because like we see the veil come off when judges do something that the media considers egregious, right? Be it when a judge is accused of sexual misconduct, or in the case of the Chief Justice, just having unpopular opinions, right? Opinions that the media does not want a Chief Justice to have. And that veil comes off and you start seeing a discourse, right? For whereby judges are looked at as individuals who have opinions, and then you start having, I think, what is needed, a mature discourse about how do these opinions color someone's legal interpretation and disposition. This is something that the American system has. I think you see it in Senate hearings when the Supreme Court justice, for instance, is about to be confirmed, whereby they just delve into the very nature of someone, right? It isn't a forgotten, like everyone in the US knows that the lifetime appointments in the US Supreme Court are human beings. We all know Clarence Thomas is a conservative who believes in certain ideas, and this we know will color his interpretation of the law. And we aren't really, and this makes it easier too for when someone else who believes in something different and has a different interpretation of the law to reverse a particular decision that they disagree with. And we saw this with Roe versus Wade, right? That in South Africa, it becomes impossible for the reversal of decisions. Like we have a very perverted idea of precedent, as I would like to say, because it is the idea that if it has been passed, then that is it. If the court has ruled in a particular manner, then that is it. And it is pretty inconceivable to have an instance where, pretty egregious pieces of precedent, like the Agri-SA judgment, just as one example in property law, right? The idea that the Agri-SA judgment would be overturned is just non-existent. The Constitutional Court will never do that because, again, we have this idea that the Constitutional Court, or the courts in general, and the judges and the people who deliver these judgments are objective. They don't have any ideological leanings, and then this just makes it difficult for us to grow, I think, as a society, whilst also acknowledging that we do have a certain semblance of independence. But I think that Martin made the point pretty well, and that like they are still part of the state, they are still part of the political elite, so they will share certain ideas. But I just also would like to, if for anything else, emphasize that man, it can get worse. I when I talk to people, I'm like, man, when I say like take your government to court, they laugh at me. Like, we don't even have that option. In South Africa, it is I think a good thing that we can still do that, even though we know that we'll probably meet a judge who's also a socialist as the government will take into court, but we still have that option. It still delays it by a little bit, so I think that is good. But yeah, man, like we need a change. I think the lever, to answer your question, needs to happen on like the citizens, society in general side. We need to start looking at judges as the human beings that they are. This will help us, but particularly in the legal sphere, like jurists needs to definitely look at judges as human beings who have opinions, who have ideological leanings, and this then will help us in the future when we are looking to get things overturned. When we are even considering judges, we now know that we are looking for certain individuals that will then inform the type of judgments that they will deliver.
Yeah, and I think it's crucial what you said there, Zakes, because there is almost a sort of sense that if the initial decision is infallible, then how could it ever change? I mean, if you have these perfect people making the decision, and it was objectively true, and the Constitution is above any form of questioning, which is also something that might be worth delving into at some point. It's just the fact that we have this. Of course, we do have a supreme constitution, supreme in the sense that it trumps all other forms of legislation, but not supreme in the sense that it has a almost divine status that it sometimes seems to take up. But Joe, I want to actually get your input on this, and that's that both Martin and Zakes have both highlighted just the the role of the media, and I'd like to actually make that a little bit broader than just the mainstream media, but the role of opinion formers, the role of thought leaders and so forth on, how do we actually go about, and, are we seeing a shift? Are we not really seeing a shift? What should be done, and who can we actually rely on to do these sorts of things when it comes to having a more almost healthy view, not just of judges, but of politics, of all those sorts of things. Just having a greater sense of, where everybody stands, the fact that, they are human beings with their own convictions, with their own incentives. They have certain things that they believe in, that they want to accomplish, and goals they want to achieve. But where has the media, perhaps the mainstream media, fit in the past, and what are some of the alternatives one can do without necessarily heading towards treason, which is apparently now a very real specter in almost every discussion. I know the answer isn't to make a anonymous Twitter account, which may or may not be retweeted by Elon Musk, but if not that, then what should we do?
Sorry.
Unmute is the first step.
Yeah. So I think, you know what, that's a very good question, because at the moment we're seeing quite an attack on free speech and freedom of expression, unless that free speech and freedom of expression is done by the people in power, right? So like the mainstream media, for example, can just name any opinion that they don't agree with, that's misinformation or disinformation, all the new buzzwords that they come up with every day. And I think the blunder we've seen now with News 24, I mean, that was an epic blunder. I'll give you a quick example in case you guys didn't see it or viewers didn't see it, but there was an interesting discussion between Peter du Toit and Twatterboss's lawyer, and on CakeNet. Yeah, Billy Spies on CakeNet. And there was a specific segment in that interview where Peter du Toit is lifting up pieces of paper that have Twatterboss's tweets that are in question right now. He lifts the one and says, "This is disinformation," and he's pointing to a graph. And he's like, "Where did he get this from? This is disinformation." And in the most beautiful irony of it all, glorious own goal, it turns out that graph came from News 24 themselves. And that little interaction encompasses everything you need to know about the mainstream media in today, basically, is that whatever they don't like, whether it's from an anonymous account or someone who a podcaster, whatever, they're going to attack you. But the answer to your question, Dr. Morné, is we must not stop being quiet. We see right now, I think that one minister, I forgot which minister it is, and I can't for the life of me remember her name, but I did do a story on it, was calling for podcasters to now be regulated. So this show, for example, she wants it to be regulated because apparently this show, for example, this podcast, does not fall under the what's it called, the South African Broadcast Regulation, whatever thing. And apparently podcasters can say whatever they want. We're not held to the Constitution. That's what she thinks. Defamation, not a problem on a podcast. Incitement to violence, apparently we can do that. But apparently the law doesn't apply to us somehow. So she wants to regulate podcasters now and put us in that little like box us in under these regulations of what we're not allowed to say and are allowed to say, which is more censorship, government overreach, government saying, hey, you're not allowed to talk bad about us, you're not allowed to say this, you're not allowed to say that. I mean, Martin uncovered a law that apparently does exist, where every video that goes up is supposed to be okayed by the Broadcasting Commission or something. That law exists. Like, you're not allowed to share WhatsApp videos, guys. You have to first get it approved before you can put it up. Obviously, this law is ridiculous and nobody abides by it and everybody ignores it. But it's an example of how the government's trying to slowly but surely creep into and suppress certain narratives or certain agendas or even certain views and opinions. And I think at some point it's going to come to a head. As long as we keep doing what we're doing, as long as this podcast, Free Market Foundation, and Rational Standard, the Joe Emilio Newsflash, and Ramon and Morning Shots, and Big Daddy Liberty, Ronaldo, all these guys and more keep speaking out, keep criticizing, keep talking about these issues, the more the public will know. And the more the public knows, the stronger the pushback can be. And we have seen pushback work. It doesn't work a lot. You need mass amount of people to agree with you. But at the end of the day, if the masses don't comply, there's nothing the government can do about it. And I mean, like, I'll give you a good example. I think I've seen it recently where people on, if you look now, if you just have one headline that threatens lockdown, watch the comment section. There'll be 1,000 comments. No one's going to abide by it. No one. Everybody's like, no, screw you. We're not doing it again. You can stuff yourself, blah, blah, blah. And and when that happens, when you have this mass agreement, there's nothing the government can do. They can try and implement it as much as what they want. They can try and send their army. Luckily, South Africa has a poor army, so that's not going to work. They got robbed in Mitchell's Plain, so good luck with that. And so, I mean, it's a joke. It really is a joke. And I think that as long as we keep doing what we're doing, even if they threaten us, even if they threaten, oh, we'll take your podcast down or whatever, there's other ways, there's other means of making sure that our voices are heard. And in doing so, I think that eventually will push back enough where hopefully the courts will rule in our favor. Hopefully other political parties will join our fight and will eventually prevail. And this applies to everything. This applies to whether it's NHI, whether it's EWC, or this new attempt at regulation on podcasts and stuff like that. I think once the government really tries to fight back and you are loud enough and you have people on your side that are also loud enough, the government backs away. At least that's my hope.
Yeah, and I think that, and this is my last comment, and then I have to unfortunately have a hard out, which was 10 minutes ago. But it's just the last comment, then Martin, you can pick up from there. It's just the fact that it's becoming increasingly clear that when you actually put a lot of these government officials, I mean, it's quite clear that they're not sending their best. And when you actually put them in a position where their policy or their ideological stance, and I agree with Joe, there is this almost wannabe totalitarian, oh, look, here's a sector of society we don't have control over yet, and that's clearly unacceptable. But when you actually put them in a position where they have to defend what it is that they're proposing, then you quickly come to realize that no, they're actually not very good. They sort of had this initial honeymoon where very few people were willing to criticize them, and I think maybe primarily after Zuma. But I think the disappointment of Ramaphosa was also for a lot of people. It sort of disillusioned them. It took off that veneer, and it became possible to say, okay, no, wait, these people are idiots. What they're proposing is stupid, which is what you get from idiots. And you see that when they're actually put in a position where they have to defend what it is that they're proposing. And I think if anything, that's what we have to do more of. And sometimes it is also a case of just hammering the same nail over and over again until eventually you break through. You have to keep knocking on the door until eventually it opens. And I think that in that case you have to just be patient. You have to realize that it's not going to necessarily be the case of within a few weeks you get all the results you want. But if you keep building building an innings, eventually you can get somewhere. And that's also something we can learn from a lot of other countries and a lot of other causes is you do have these situations. I mean, Zakes talked about Roe versus Wade. That was a decade upon decade upon decade program for the pro-life cause. And regardless of how you feel about that, the fact is that there were a bunch of people who were committing, multiple decades towards a particular cause, and it eventually bore fruit for them. So you always have to keep those sorts of things in perspective, and also keep into perspective just the level of ineptitude in our government as well. So, I mean, don't necessarily shy away just because someone has a fancy title, which I think maybe in the past people were more likely to do. But yeah, that's me, guys. I have to get out now, but I put it in your trustworthy hands. So don't do anything stupid while I'm away. I don't want I don't want to find out that we've been now regulated and fall under the Minister of Communications or anything like that. And cheers, everyone.
Cheers, Morné. Yeah, thanks.
Cheers.
So
As
mean,
long
that's-
as nobody insults the mini, then we'll be fine.
yeah, no. Let's keep it clean, guys. Yeah, it's. I think this is an important point, and I think it touches on what we discussed about the courts in the sense that while the courts do have an important role to play, if you outsource the responsibility for keeping government in check entirely to the courts, then you are going to have an issue. Because take the podcast regulation example. So the courts are both explicitly but largely implicitly bound by certain rules that your kind of average person don't know about. And one of those rules is that the court will only rule on what is put before it. So if the government decided in all its wisdom to introduce legislation to say we're regulating podcasts now, and this is now the law, the courts aren't going to jump out of the woodwork and say, that's unconstitutional and we can't have that because freedom of expression, yay. No, that's not going to happen unless someone goes to the court and argues that point in a way that the court would accept. It's not gonna be kind of, you can't just go there and say, this is unfair. It's a dumb idea. The court is going to say, listen, this is an act of parliament. This is the law, and unless you convince us that this is incompatible somehow with the constitution, and you do it in a way that is convincing according to our paradigm and our logic, then that's just how it's going to be. So the courts aren't waiting around to rescue society. They're not kind of they're not a guardian in that sense. They're not the shield bearer who stands before the hordes of kind of tyranny that come at us. That is actually a role that civil society must play. That is a role that commerce to some degree must play. That is a role that ordinary South Africans have to play themselves. Because if you're entirely reliant on the courts, then there's like this whole field of battle that you've ceded just here at the very end to try and kind of beat it at the courts, which is reckless at the very least. So I think that's a crucially important point. You have to use social pressure to undermine these things, and this is something that the media and maybe not specifically journalists, but the commentariat actually doesn't agree with at all. Because whenever there's a big point of contention in the discourse, and you say, oh, that's wrong, that's unconstitutional, that's illegal, the commentariat says, no, but we don't see a judgment on this. The courts haven't said anything about this. So surely you cannot say that this is a bad thing or this is an unconstitutional thing. And it's like, well, no, actually, no. The court thing, maybe it's coming at some point, but actually we're engaged in a discourse here. And you do get to say that apartheid, for instance, is a counter-constitutional phenomenon before the courts have ruled on it. You do get to say that EWC is unconstitutional before the courts have ruled on it. And we as kind of influencers. We have a responsibility to inculcate that in society, so that we can undo this elevated position, really, that the media has created for the courts, to say that that is actually the only legitimate terrain of contestation. Zakes, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think like it's a good point that you're making, right? Especially about how it is, the media considers any form of at least discourse about the constitutionality or the legality of certain actions taken by the state happening outside of the court system as being invalid. That is, no, I wouldn't say all the time. It is a very ideological, cynical thing that the media does, whereby when certain lines of argument or pushback against government action comes from certain sectors of society, right? Like, for instance, just as a typical example, because people usually get emotional about stuff like this. If an organization like the Merkel Foundation, right, were to push back up against something and say a certain thing is unconstitutional, the media, most cases than not, at the prima facie level, would be like, oh no, these people are speaking from a position of privilege, therefore we should wait for the courts to decide on this. Oh, how can you say this? The entire argument you mentioned, oh no, the court hasn't ruled that a minimum wage is is unconstitutional, or the various labor laws are unconstitutional, therefore how dare you even say that this is the law, this is what the law says, right? And then an organization like the Institute of Economic Justice, right, the people who want to give us a universal basic income. If they were to come out and say a particular, just like as they have multiple times, and say that a particular government action is unconstitutional, they get their media releases released verbatim on the front page of News 24, where President Tuli Madonsela writes op-eds that are promoted for them. And then it isn't that, oh no, but the court hasn't ruled about it. I remember before the SRD grant was, the court, before it ruled that the government should institute it on a permanent basis, right? It was generally a acceptable thing to say that, oh no, like this thing should be, extended to a permanent basis. The government is unconstitutional for not doing that, and it was something that the media did not say that, let the courts decide on it. So I think it is quite ideological, but on the general, we do see this, deference a whole lot, particularly on legal issues, to just the court themselves, forgetting that the courts are not infallible. To me, that is I think the biggest takeaway too, that like even the highest of courts, and I think Americans, with the pro-life situation, that is the best one. They understood that, right? Like there were people, large swath of Americans, who were like, nope, the Supreme Court got it wrong. And we are willing to commit like decades of our lives to show that the Supreme Court got it wrong. And there's this video like that of this organizer from the US who was speaking or being interviewed about, does he think that he'll get Roe versus Wade overturned? And he did this interview in the early 2000s. And it was like, oh no, he doesn't believe in his lifetime he'll get to do it. He thinks that he will die, but he definitely thinks in his children's lifetime, definitely it will be overturned. And like everywhere, when Trump got into office and he started appointing Supreme Court justices, I saw that video, by the way, on like I think one of these late night shows on that Americans do. But I found it pretty seminal that like here is someone who, even though you may disagree with him, you can't fault his loving of his society and loving of his country, because he was willing to commit to change a particular policy direction, even if he could not live to see the benefits thereof, because he believed in the truthfulness of what he was striving for. And I think we need, as Joe said, to just keep on doing what we're doing, just keep on pushing, just keep on doing the things that we know make them uncomfortable doing, right? Speaking out when something is considered unconstitutional, of course, with the added caveat of when civil society can take these things to court, it should. I am a huge proponent of using litigation, particularly for us in SA, as a means to stop the state. But yeah, it is unfortunate that we have a media environment that I think is starting to change now, given the actual severity of what civil society has actually done, right? And actually, pushing back against a whole lot of what the state has been doing, in being involving other, foreign governments, whether you agree or disagree, right? But given the fact that the pushback from the private sector has been so large, now they have no choice. They have to have these conversations before they get to court. They have to have podcasts. I think I'm about to listen to one. I was listening to it halfway, a podcast about EWC between, I think, Gabriel Kraus from the IRR and some other, individuals. I think it was hosted by News 24, but I'm interested in listening to it. But, something like that, someone from the IRR being invited on a panel. On
Wait. You consume News 24 content? Oh my word!
Oh, yeah. I consume all news
Shame on you.
content. I consume all news content, and thankfully enough, I hope I have not come into their scope, right? For them to dox me like they did the poor dude. Like, man, that was pretty messed up. But yeah, I am not at least important enough for them to care about me. But back to my point, Joe. Like, the point is that they invited Gabriel to speak on EWC, and I think when I was reading at least the story written about the podcast, the arguments we're making, of course, are pretty sensible stuff about how the states, there are better ways to do these things. But that's a conversation that is happening before, because people who are pushing against the opposition to EWC were like, oh no, let the courts deal with it. It'll be taken to court, and then the courts will strike it down if it is unconstitutional and things like that. I'm like, it doesn't need to get there, right? If something is wrong with something, like, we can talk about it as within society before it gets to the court, and actually it will help when it gets to the court, because judges, as we've said, are human beings. They gauge the particular temperature of their society, and that may influence how they rule on certain issues. So yeah, man, I think the biggest takeaway for me, I'm sorry if I'm like talking a lot, I find the idea of like judges being seen as people to be extremely important. I think it cuts to the core of what's like, if we're trying to get change in South Africa, we will need to look at like judges not as these automatons who reproduce judgments in an objective manner, but like individuals who have ideological leanings, who have principles that they believe in. And this will help at the JSC level then, because these political parties will start asking the proper questions, not these questions that they keep on asking that really have no substance on the type of jurisprudence someone will produce, but they'll start asking the proper questions, and hopefully in the future, right, we'll start getting the proper judges.
Martin, can I just add one quick point to the whole to my previous answer, which I think is very important, because I know that there's going to be some cynical people that are like, yeah, but what's the point? Nobody listens. There's cynical people all the time, and I'll say this: we have seen in the past like 5-6 years, like before lockdown, in just these few years, so 5 years, we've seen an immense change in the way the public views mainstream media and the ANC. Before lockdown, it was extremely taboo. Even in maybe even way before that, maybe we're talking about like 2016, 2014, somewhere there, early 2010s. It was extremely taboo, and you were shunned, you were criticized if you even dare mention anything about the ANC. Now, it's like, it's cool to criticize the ANC. Yeah, some wokies and all that stuff will be offended. Who cares about the wokes? But I'm talking about the general public. General public is more accepting to criticizing the ANC, whereas before they would have been like, "Oh no, you can't say that. How that's racist." And now the same people that would have said that are now saying, "No, screw the ANC, futsek." So if you talk about these things, if you are open and you are able to voice these opinions all the time, not opinions about incitement or racist opinions, but level-headed, rational opinions, like, "Hey guys, this EWC is going to be a problem, or NHI is going to be a problem, or here's why." This idea of regulating podcasts is a bad idea. And you rationally explain it to your common people, the everyday person, who, by the way, most of the time is too busy to even worry about this stuff. They need people like us. They rely on people like us, Rational Standard and the previous people that I mentioned before, to get honest opinions, not even news, just honest opinions, rational opinions, where people can go like, you know what, I agree with that. I see the problem there. The mainstream media isn't actually talking about that. You know, they're actually like praising the ANC, whereas you guys are bringing like a different side to the coin, which is actually very important. And it gets people talking, and people talk at braais, they talk at parties, they talk with their workers, co-workers, or whatever. And slowly but surely ideas spread. And before you know it, that's like the example I just said about criticizing the ANC. Before you know it, it's all of a sudden the norm. It's like, okay, we can criticize the ANC. It's not taboo anymore. And that's how it works. Unfortunately, it takes years in some cases. It can take decades in some cases. But for those of you who say, what's the point? Listen, it's not an overnight fix. Unfortunately, everybody would like it to be an overnight fix. But at the end of the day, if you're silent, you're complacent in basically being oppressed and like letting the government control you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because it shows that you can move the Overton window. It's a long process, but if you don't begin the process, you're obviously extending how long it would ultimately take. So with criticizing some of the ANC's, criticizing the ANC per se, criticizing Ramaphosa per se, like there was a time when he was majestic and he was kind of the second reincarnation of Jesus. You couldn't say anything about this great guy, but now, while I think the media still tends to have that view of him, it's actually not as contentious anymore to criticize the man Ramaphosa anymore. Certainly, that applies to policies like BEE, where it used to be a taboo, but now you have it's become acceptable to say that this thing actually isn't a terribly great idea anymore. Um, but on the question of the courts, this process has not started, which is where I'm a little bit concerned. Where even if you like Jakes and I and are often kind of in meetings with lawyers, with practicing lawyers about how we're gonna take on a certain policy or so on, and it just always strikes me that the and Jakes spoke about this earlier, the very idea of going to the court to say that the court's own previous judgment was wrong and must be reversed is like, you can see these advocates and attorneys, they're like, what are you, I mean, no, we can't say that. And certainly this is how it works in the discourse as well. We've brought up Roe versus Wade in the US a few times now. Like in the states, if you said that, okay, abortion is wrong and unconstitutional, it would be very rare. It did happen, but it would be rare for someone to say, "Oh no, but Roe versus Wade," because you're begging the question almost. It's like, well, yeah, sure, cool. There's a judgment, and that's what the law currently is, but we're disagreeing with the judgment. I mean, hello, we're disagreeing with the political statement that the court has made. And yes, we respect that that is, in fact, the law. That is what legislation must be compatible with. That is what public policy must be compatible with, because it is the law. But that does not mean we do not get to overturn that law in the future. A judgment is like a piece of legislation. It's maybe slightly elevated, but it's an act of parliament that you can and in many circumstances should endeavor to overturn. But our lawyers are not there. They see it if the constitutional court has said, okay, um, nationalizing a whole category of property, agri-SA, does not amount to expropriation. That is the law in South Africa. And now to even propose to go to the court and say, hey guys, maybe you got a little bit ahead of yourselves when you said these things. So here's an opportunity to kind of reverse this questionable law. If you say that to our lawyers, certainly if you say that to our journalists, but if you say that to our lawyers, they're like, we can't. I mean, it's the law. We can't go. So we've managed to move the Overton window. We haven't won the battle by any means, but we've managed to move the Overton window on many things, but not this yet, because I don't think we've started yet. I think most people see the courts as a holy cow. You can't go there, when in fact going there is actually, it's good for the society. It's good for law. It's good, very good for law, and I think ultimately it's good for the judges as well. I mean, it it puts them in a far more kind of, maybe say, a more measured expectation realm of measured expectations, where they're not these gods that move amongst us, but they're human beings, and sometimes they're gonna make a mistake, and that mistake is gonna be fixed, and that's not the end of the world. The judge can say, "Well, sheesh, sorry, I made a mistake, so let's fix it," rather than saying now the whole it's constitutional crisis and everything's gonna kind of collapse. So I think it's just good all around to get to that point where we can talk about overturning Agri SA. It's not taboo to allude to something like that happening. Zakes.
Yeah. I agree with you completely, and I think the problem does lie. You and I would know this because we studied with people who are practicing attorneys, and you would see it from there. The general environment, right? I always tell people part of the reason why I have not practiced as of yet, although I'm going to be doing so soon, is that like the environment, the league, the environment around legal essay is not a good one. My love of the law was influenced largely by American legal culture, libertarian legal culture a lot, right? So the idea of it's natural law. We are guided by natural law, by ideas of justice, meaning, and the discovery of law. So the idea that whatever judgment, legislation, or whatever that is passed is final is like antithetical to the very idea, my philosophy to how I approach law, which is, oh no, as human beings, we continuously get better at stuff. And we may get stuff wrong, but what is great is that using the basis of like the protection of individual rights and liberty, using that as a principle, as a guiding principle, we can always refine and get better at things when we do get them wrong. But that does not exist in South Africa, and I think that the only people who can change that are the jurists themselves, right? The people who are legally trained, the people who interact with the judiciary a lot. They have a whole lot of influence on that. So why I like advocacy that is done by guys like Mark, right? Guys who take on cases that are not the most popular in terms of political discourse, but understand the principle of arguing the most just position for your client as best as you could in order to enhance our legal tradition, right? And I think that is necessary. The idea that it is taboo, as you said, man, I know it is taboo because I remember my property law lecturer knew me by name because the first time she taught me about IPSA, I went to her after. I was like, this this is bad law. This is just like a bad interpretation of how you understand property, and its implication is expropriation without going through the steps of expropriation. And it is like just this formal law. No, you don't take people's right to property because we said so, even though substantively you do, because how can you own property that a mine will be built on? It isn't yours anymore. The state takes it. But I'm digressing. So what I'm saying, but like her, she just, even though I could see she agreed with me, she seemed dumbfounded as to how she can go about changing that, because as you said, oh, but it's the law, it's the way things are. And I'm like, that is defeatist. We have to start the work, right? And it also is part of on us as civil society, right? Can try and write more about this, the idea of overturning judgments, the idea of interrogating the judiciary, the people within it, and the general philosophy. I try to do that, particularly in competition law, for me personally, because I have an interest in competition law, and I try to argue about how general interpretation and the understanding of law needs to change, and how when I'm arguing against competition, I'm not arguing against a specific decision of the tribunal. I'm arguing against the very nature of how that decision came to be, to be taken, the very understanding and how they interpret the law itself. And it is a monumental task, right, to do something like that. But I'm always heartened when someone from a law firm would be like, I read your article and I think it was great. I'm like, yeah, good. Now apply the ideas and go put the fire to the competition commission, right? But they have different incentives. They usually want to win cases instead of being legal crusaders like I am in civic society. So there's that too. But I think we definitely need to do the work, Martin. I agree. Like I have a passion for law and justice, and I think that we do our legal sphere disservice by having this approach whereby it is the judiciary is inaccessible. They are like these sacred cows in our society that cannot be touched. But I think we will be helped when we start seeing. That's why, even though I may disagree with what in the mainstream media did to the Chief Justice for expressing his opinions, they pretty much vilified him, right? And the former Chief Justice, that is Mogoeng, on Israel and things like that, they vilified him. But I think that was good. It is good to have a conversation whereby we're like, hey, you are a person, and I don't know whether I want you and these ideas you hold to be, I want you as a person to be deciding the fates of my rights and how I exercise them. Or if you do, this will help me, because then I will know that, I should put pressure on my political party who sits on the JSC to then push for someone who does not think like you, because I now know what I do not want. But I think the discourse, of course, has to happen. I will definitely do my part in writing more about this, because it is something that's pretty important.
I kind of disagree with you guys on the notion that people view courts as glorious or this thing that shouldn't be touched, and I'll tell you why. At least in my experience with speaking to people around me and stuff like that, and even looking at my comment section, a lot of the times when I talk about court problems or issues or like legal cases, whether it be from the ground of like what happened with the Blue Mafia Brigade, or someone who got released on bail for 2,000 Rand after RAPE someone, or talking about Kill the Boer ruling, the majority of people seem to say, not surprised, courts suck, courts never worked. Like, it's all negative towards the courts. And even in like everyday life, where I speak to people who I know don't consume news that much, who are not politically inclined, if I chat to them about any one of those things that I just mentioned, they'll either be shocked in the sense of like, oh wow, I can't believe like they let that guy go for 2,000 Rand, or they'll say like, typical, nothing works in South Africa, why should we care? And I think that is the majority of people view the courts that way, that they actually don't work. Because so many people know of someone that have been in courts for years, that they spend a lot of money on the courts, and maybe the ruling didn't go their way, or some thief got away with it, or someone was incorrectly sentenced or whatever. I'm not saying that happens all the time, but it does happen. And I think a lot of people have seen, in the mainstream media, how the courts maybe don't go in the way people expect them to. And a lot of people actually don't have faith in the courts. A lot of people actually do think they're captured. A lot of people don't have faith in them. And I don't think I think maybe with the Constitutional Court, there's an image of like, oh, wow, this is like, we mustn't touch the Constitutional Court. But with all the other courts, I think people have been disappointed many times with some of the rulings that have come out, the way that the courts have ruled on certain things. And I think that a lot of people have that attitude of, it's broken, leave it. Like in the same way they viewed the SAPs, right? They know the SAPs can't be trusted. They know this is pointless to call the SAPs if you're in trouble, blah, blah, blah. So it's almost that kind of vibe with the courts. Like, what's the point? If I go to the courts, I'm going to be spending years in the courts. At least that's the impression I get from some people. And then there's also a lot of people don't know. Like, there's a surprisingly good amount of people that actually don't know how bad it actually is in the courts, that they don't know that, like, surprisingly, that the Constitutional Court ruled in favor of Kill the Boer. A lot of people know that, but there are some people that don't. There's a lot of people that don't know that the court ruling of the DA with the cater deployment. A lot of people don't know that, and that's just from speaking to a few people that I've engaged with over the past few weeks. Like, hey, did you hear this? And they're like, no, I didn't even know. And I think there's a generation, from at least what I've noticed from statistics and looking at various analytics, is that at least from a YouTube consumption and some social media consumption, the people that care the most are from ages I'd say 45, 50 to 65, the elderly generation that we have that exists now. But the younger generation, they don't consume this content. They don't really care. And those are the ones that don't know. Those are the ones that like, oh, really? Oh, I thought it was like this, or I thought it was like that. So that's why I say, like, there is a little bit of like, oh, we mustn't touch the courts. But I think the more problem is maybe we don't talk about the courts specifically enough. Like Zake says, he wants to write more about it. Write more about it, write a lot more about it, and hopefully we can amplify that message and start reaching people about that. Because yeah, I really think people either just assume that the courts don't work and they're like, why bother, or they
don't know.
yeah.
I think, to your point, Joe, I will agree with you, but I think it actually shows, I think, me and Martin's point in that, bad judgments happen everywhere in every court system, and it is the accountability in being able to change bad judgments that we need in the South African discourse, right? It is the accountability, and that is why I think that we need something like this, and it actually proves the point that we think, like, whether it is due to the fact that we think we cannot change them, or due to the fact that we think that they are so right that they can do no wrong, right? But the idea that courts should not be touched, or they cannot be touched because what can we do to such an institution? And I just saw a comment there about, like, how a particular perpetrator was let go, and how can you trust in an institution like that? And I'm like, that is though the problem, right? I'm a libertarian, so I believe that the best way to solve conflicts in society is through adjudication. Adjudication, reduces the instances of conflict. It just creates a certain level of certainty in society that is necessary to be able to function properly. So we cannot just leave them like that. We can't just be like, they suck, which is really, they're so great. Really, like, we have to, if they suck, let's change them. Let's find a way to change them. We have political parties that sit on these boards that appoint these judges, and a president who is responsible for that. Like, let us put the pressure. And as you said, we're gonna, I personally am gonna continue doing things like that, or start doing things like that, because it is necessary. But yeah, them being bad actually is a case for us to focus more on them, because if they're bad, then we definitely need to do something about it, right? About the justice ministry in general. But yeah, this is something that's, of course, someone like me would be more focused on in general, how horrible they are. Like, oh man, I agree with you, Joe. They're horrible. People do think that they're horrible. And also I also know people who think, oh man, these courts are so great, right? Because I'm sure the people at the IEJ think that the ruling about the SLD grant is the best thing that has ever come out of our jurisprudence. So, either way, though, even from whatever side, no one wants to interrogate, like, let us let's talk about what type of jurisprudence we want, right? I think Martin was one of the first people whom I saw from the other side speak of transformationism, right, as like a thing. Firstly, that is not part of our constitutional paradigm. Therefore, it is just a thing that we created and imparted on the constitution, and it was speaking against it, right? And that now is like an actual. Every time I see, like, the justice ministry say that our constitution gives us an imperative to transform, I'm like, no, where there's no such word, right? But such things, though, the thinking in people is not possible, and if Martin does not write about and transformationism and things like that. So yeah, I think we can make things better. Of course, we haven't gotten to the point whereby we've gotten transformationism out of our judiciary, but it starts with someone like me going, I ain't buying that. I ain't buying that.
Yeah, so I mean, this is where Joe, you're obviously completely right. Most people actually don't care one way or the other, or they have kind of worries, kind of concerns. But that's the problem. It's the lack of engagement. And when I think, as a general rule, when we talk about, well, the courts are accepted and so on, we're we're inherently referring to those who are engaged, because, and then I know this sounds terrible for me to say it, and I do apologize if anyone watching this sees themselves in this camp, but if you're not engaged, you do not matter. It doesn't matter if you are part of the majority, the silent majority, and you're kind of a taxpayer, and you do all this, you think you're doing stuff for the country and so on. If you are unengaged, you are irrelevant, and that's the problem with the courts. The people who are engaged, the majority of people who are engaged in the discourse around the courts, think that our courts are just perfect and they're just great. And people like me and Chris Malan and Zakes and Mark Oppenheimer, and a handful of others are in fact pushing back. Joe, you play a big role in this. I remember we have discussed court rulings on your show as well. We're a tiny minority. We're saying that, listen, all is not necessarily well in the court system, and we must respect the courts, but there are some questions that have to be answered. But we're a minority of the engaged population who tend to just say uh, complete perfection in the courts, and our engaged population has had their hand burned by this, which is a good point that Zakes made. It's so Mogoeng was Chief Justice for many years. He was Chief Justice on the Agri SA case, and many other cases. And this minority that I referred to said, "My goodness, people, this guy is." He, he's a really bad judge. Like, this guy is a absolutely horrible judge. And the media said, no, but no, you can't say that. This is he's the chief justice, and they've now laid down the law, and we have to defer to this wonderful precedent that was set in the name of transformation. And then Mogoeng turns out to be pro-Israel, and now there's a problem. Now they're like, no, but wait a second. Maybe this guy's opinions, and this was the point. This was the problem with Agri SA. If you read that judgment, it does not read as you would expect a judgment to read. What does Mogoeng do? He is in fact he he steps into the position of a spokesperson for the Department of Minerals and Energy. He effectively says, "Oh, this is the best legislation that our parliament has ever written, and look at all these wonderful things that it's being adopted for." And it's like, listen, guy, if you want to say it's constitutional, you can do that without being a PR mouthpiece for the legislation. So what did that tell us? That told us that this is an individual who is failing to exercise the role of judge, the office of judge, outside of their personal preferences. You could see he has trouble distinguishing between my role as a judge and my role as someone who kind of see stuff in politics that I like. And this was pointed out. This was said, listen, this guy is not succeeding. He is failing in this thing. And then the media and polite society realized, okay, so now we have a judge who is expressing himself very vociferously on matters of foreign policy. And this is a problem, because if you are a pro-Palestinian litigator and you're now going to go to court, and you know this guy is the chief justice, what the hell, what are you going to do now? Because the impression of impartiality, the impression of justice being seen to be done, will just be absent from the get-go, because you don't have any faith in this person. And of course, judges are always going to be opinionated, but it's one of those unspoken rules of being a judge that I referred to earlier, that you must keep it to yourself. You must respect the fact that you are now a judge, and you must be conscious, you must be uber conscious of your own biases, and they're always going to influence what you do. But don't go around saying, what a wonderful kind of this thing is so great and people shouldn't dare challenge it, and this thing is so terrible, and like you're just undermining faith in the system. And this is where the engaged population burned their hand, and they're continuing to burn their hands. We had Judge Glope. He's the parliamentary leader of MK. Now it's almost reversed. People criticized him when he was a judge, but now he's seen as this jurist, this kind of kind of what do you say? Kind of intellectual leader of MK, and I like he spoke about Zuma the other day and the criminal prosecutions, and he said that Zuma was prosecuted under Roman Dutch law, and I'm like, how like if I'm ever prosecuted, I would like to be prosecuted under Roman Dutch law. But how is one prosecuted under Roman Dutch law? Is that even possible? Like our law of procedure is an act of parliament that is inspired by the English kind of system of
True.
procedure, and he should know
That's
this.
true.
He was the judge president of the Western Cape High Court. Like he should know this, but he says Zuma was prosecuted under Roman Dutch law.
It is,
And
man, I'm sorry to interject, Martin. It is political, right? It is political, and I don't
of
like
course,
it
yes,
because,
of course,
as you know, I have my thoughts on Roman law, right? The
sure,
Dutch
yeah,
variant of Roman law, that's the Dutch got it right when they took over the thing. Got some things right, of course, but the Roman law in general. But like, and even having that discourse, it's just him throwing something out rhetorically, like, yeah, he was prosecuted under Roman Dutch. I'm like, man, if a former judge is incapable of being like, okay, I have a problem with Roman Dutch law for this reason and this reason. I have a problem with the criminal justice system that is inspired in large parts by English common law, but it's okay. But he's not saying that. He's instead trying to undermine the system that he was a part of by saying that Juma's criminal prosecution is somehow colonially influenced.
mm,
Like,
mm.
and this guy sat on a bench and decided whether people would have liberty or not. And I'm like, man, it is sad. But yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
He's
No, no,
he's just trying to say that the law is racist in a fancy way.
Pretty
yes,
much.
but
Pretty
he should
much.
have just said that. He should have just said that.
Right?
But what he
Like,
does
just come out
instead,
and say that.
yeah, what he does instead is he says this thing, which I mean, it sounds very impressive. I mean, he sits there and you can see he's not shouting it like Malema shouts. He's like having a conversation with the media, I think, and that's fine. But everyone accepted that. So this was reported on in IOL, in News 24, in various publications that presumably have legal beat journalists on the legal beat. And they just repeated this. They said, former Judge Kloppe, official leader of the official opposition, said that it's wrong that the former president was prosecuted under Roman Dutch law. And it's this what I was alluding to. It's this, you venerate the judge like he's in this position, but you do it so uncritically, and then you burn your hand, and you are going to burn your hand. So yeah, my view is that we're a minority. The majority out there, they're unengaged, and the more of them get engaged, the better, I think. Just to kind of breathe some new ideas into the discourse. But as things stand, and this is the case really around the world, is that the only people who really matter are those who are engaged. And there's various ways to be engaged. Fund political parties, fund think tanks, litigate, of course, write letters to the editor, then you're engaged. People commenting on videos, that is some measure of engagement, and we love you and we appreciate you, but we're
And
the
if you're
only ones who are going to see
subscribed
your
to
comments.
Rational Standard,
Yes,
then you're engaged too.
yes, yeah,
You gotta
then you're
subscribe.
definitely engaged. That's real engagement. But yeah, we're the only ones who are going to see your comments, and being engaged in the discourse means that you kind of you're not always going to get in fights. I think sometimes fights are not the best use of your time, but your enemies must see that their ideas are being pushed back against. And then, in that sense, that's how you get the media and then the lawyers, or maybe first the lawyers and then the media, to kind of understand that the court system is not unassailable, and we must respect it, and we must develop it, and we have to make sure that it becomes a more perfect guardian of our freedoms and our limited of a more perfect kind of guarantor of limited political action. But we will never be able to get there unless we start being critical. critical of the courts. Guys, our time is up, but I'm going to give each of you a moment to give some concluding remarks, and then I will wrap it up at the end. Joe, let's go with you first, and then Jakes.
Cool. First of all, thank you guys once again for inviting me on the show. Always have fun and interesting conversations. What I will say is, I think what everybody should take away from this is don't be quiet and don't sit around and think that things are just going to be okay. The ANC government is communist in nature. They tell you what they want to do, and they are doing it. There's a lot of legislations that are quite worrying, and guys like Free Market Foundation, Zakhele that we've mentioned, are fighting against it, but they need your help. So with watch our content, but at the same time support these guys, whether it be financially or even just spreading their message around, sharing an article, whatever, sharing the stream. That is engagement, that is helping, that is telling someone who may not know what is really going on. And I think that's very important. And there needs to be this shift, this tsunami, if you will, of the other side, because right now the mainstream media does hold all the cards, but pretty soon they won't. As long as we push back, pretty soon they won't. And I think that's very important. And even if you're one of those cynical people that say, why bother? Well, then you fall into that category that Martin mentioned just now, and you can sit there on your porch and watch them take your land and cry about it. But other than that, thank you guys so much for having me, and you can find me on Newsflash with Joe Emilio YouTube channel, and on your social media as well. Just Google Joe Emilio, you'll find me. So yeah, once again, thanks guys. Very awesome conversation.
Really agree with what Joe said. Don't keep quiet. I am a huge proponent of free speech myself, so never keep quiet under any circumstances. So there's that. And on the legal side, man, I know personally, me and Martin are friends or are fans of judicial activism, right? Like, well, to a certain extent. So really, if you take anything away, focus on those courts. Like you know these judges, know who they are if you can, but if you can't, really try and familiarize yourself with what informs our jurisprudence. I know for me, I'm interested in stuff like that, but I think it will help in understanding the point that Martin said, like, never forget that the courts are part of the state. There's just the three arms of the state, and as long as it is a state that is controlled by a party that is antagonistic to people being free in general, then there will be problems there. But don't give up and be engaged, like genuinely be engaged, unless you don't want to matter, then that would be sad.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Thanks, Joe, for joining us again on such short notice. Thanks, Jake's nice law episode for us law nerds. So this was fun, and of course, thank you to everyone for joining us on another crazy week in South Africa. These are not going to run out anytime soon, and you'll always notice that I point this out, and you might get an insight into my character. I don't like the craziness. I'm an introvert. I'm someone who wants to sit around at home drinking hot chocolate, watching Netflix. But the state kind of grabs my attention more than it should, and I find that very distressing. And
viewers need to know the truth. Martin is a young man at heart. No, sorry, is a young man physically, but mentally and heart, he's your grandfather. He's your angry, frustrated.
I'm not angry.
Humbug.
I don't know about the angry part.
Grandfather.
The old part. I will agree with Joe. The angry part, he's pretty chill.
That gives me away,
right?
Yeah.
The head just completed the look.
He's very young physically, but mentally and at the heart, he likes being inside and don't make too much noise.
I'm a man who appreciates the quiet, and I rarely get what I want. I think that's the important bit. But yeah, thank you to everyone who joined us live. Of course, you guys are great, spending an hour and a half with us every Friday. We hope it's insightful. We trust it's insightful. Is why you keep coming back. We appreciate you, and of course, we appreciate everyone who views this content a little bit later. Most of you come in on Sunday afternoons. I don't know if it's after church thing. Really appreciate you guys as well, kind of ruining your Sunday bliss with more injection of political energy and jurisprudential energy. Thank you. We really appreciate you guys too. But of course, as always, please remember to like this video, subscribe, as Joe said. Most important thing, click the bell icon. Make sure you get the very nice. Make sure you get the notifications of our content. And always please share this on other social media as well. We are primarily now on Substack. That's where the Rational Standard is hosted, rationalstandard.com. So please restack this content, like it on Substack, and of course share on Facebook, repost on X. And elsewhere, and make sure that other people also get some value out of this content if you think it will be valuable to them. But without further ado, we will see you all next week, same time, same place. Cheerio.